It's a chance, very frankly, to share what we're doing together with CISCO in a market that I know people have different opinions on. I believe the market, as we talked about in our keynote today, will come to the service providers. I think when you think about the key industry transitions that are going on, what was broadband that introduced a series of innovations over the last 5 to 7 years, the virtual cloud, the SP Wi-Fi, any device to any content will, I think, drive a decade of innovation. And I think we're at the very front end on this. I have a view, and it may not be shared by all my colleagues, that it is set up for an architectural play that will go from literally the data center or the cloud, if you will, with how processors and networking and storage works together over a combination of wired and wireless networks to any device. That it will be driven as much by video as the primary access point of view over time as it has today by data. That it will literally result in the transformation of many service providers on a global basis. First, because when you talk to the leadership of the service providers, and I know the leaders of the three groups here very well, their view is very simple. We have to transform ourselves and focus on innovation. But also, candidly, from a business perspective, a business case perspective, is the revenues are not growing in the service provider accounts around the world, keeping up with what the expenses are for capital. And so there has to be a transition that occurs here in terms of innovation and in terms of new business models. And I think for both reasons you will see that occur. If we agree upon everything we talked about today, I have failed miserably. And so my goal is to not do that, but really talk about how we go forward as a team. So if you look at the group, I want to start, if I can, Dennis, since you're closest to me. 17 years at Shaw, the ability to transform a company, to be able to compete both against smaller peers and larger competitors, $5 billion run rate, often leading in technology in many ways, and he really understands both the technology and the business case. They're a great CISCO partner, and I'll ask you about that, but also you've always been leading edge in terms of the approach. So thank you very much, Dennis, for joining us. Terry, if I remember right on the numbers, over $50 billion in revenues, 262 million customers, an ability to see a company in transition where literally in the European environment, you're increasing both your brand, your relevancy, and moving into a new area faster perhaps the last 2 years than maybe in the decade before that.
We should say the last 2 weeks or less, according to the entrance of a fourth player within France. So yes, it's going faster and faster.
It is, and what you will see, I believe, is that the strong players, this naturally comes to the market for those that innovate. And I do believe the future of service providers will be one that will generate profits a lot faster than most people project, but it will be required on how innovation occurs. Chris, you know, I'm going to tell a story. I ended up at CISCO out of luck. I went into the high-tech industry because I was trained as a lawyer and a business person. I was very passionate about it. I was headed to New York City or Chicago, and one of my buddies called up and said, "Would you interview at IBM?" And I said, "Steve, I have no interest in interviewing at IBM. I'm not sure I want to be a salesperson." He said, "I have 2 tickets to the basketball game," and I said, "I'll be there." Chris, lifelong plan was to give back to young people, to make a difference both in being able to teach math and teach young people about math in high school, but also in sports, the balance of those, probably as a volleyball coach at the same time. And yet one of your professors headed you the exact opposite way. Now, as you find out very quickly about Chris, she will remind you at times of your teacher that when you did something wrong, looks at you like this and corrects it. And it's that candor that she's known for in the industry. But you know what AT&T's done and what you all are doing reinventing yourselves. And again, using Randall just as one more example. The leadership at the top gets it. They know they have to change. You're seeing them change very rapidly and change cultures at the same time. If you watch what they put in place, you can also see where they're going as a company and the direction. Chris, you've had responsibility for the directions in terms of AT&T and many of the new technologies in R&D for quite a while. Kelly, you're my right arm, and you're Pankaj, and along with Padma, heads up all of engineering. Kelly has headed up our mobile strategy, and before that, fixed strategy. And each time we had an opportunity, we asked him to go lead on it. You've done an amazing job on an architectural play as opposed to individual products. So welcome to the group, and I will start, Kelly, just very quickly with you since I brought it to you last. The announcements we made today. if you would just kind of summarize where they fit in to our overall strategy and kind of level set, as well as introduce a couple additional guests we have here in the audience.
Sure. Thanks, John. So a couple of things. One is, in terms of the market and the industry, we recently announced our mobile BNI data, which talks about traffic growth, device growth, and the consumption patterns. Related to that, we've made some very important announcements today, and there's three parts of the announcement. One is the introduction of the CISCO small cell gateway solutions, which is really kind of taking the intelligent core and combining it to be not just for cellular or macro radio networks, but also for Wi-Fi or unlicensed, but also for small cells like femtos. The second one is SP Wi-Fi in terms of next generation hotspot, which is really focused around providing seamless roaming across Wi-Fi networks, but also to be able to, in the future, provide roaming across Wi-Fi and the cellular networks as well. And the last part, very important, which is the customers and partners that we have that are working with us and leading the industry. So there, we have partners, of course, on the table here, but we also have Chris Bruce from BT Open Zone, who also leads the Wireless Broadband Alliance, Shrikman Shinwai, who also is part of the Broadband Alliance and CEO of that, and also Alan Norman from Google, who are also partnering with us in this next-gen hotspot journey as well. So I want to thank them for being here as well.
Chris, if you would teach us a little bit. How do service providers reinvent themselves, and how do the areas such as where you're going with small cell and reinventing the revenue streams as well as new opportunities for AT&T? So first on, was I close to the definition of why the company's changing? What are the key challenges there? And then bring it back to the topic at hand, talking about where we see global service providers going and the example of what small cell means. I think if my data's right, with the femto cell, you are the largest users in the world by a long way of many of these new technologies.
So one way that for years and years we have cell split, if you will, from a spectrum standpoint, from a vertical standpoint. And now in order for us to service more and more, when you're growing 8,000% over a 4-year period, in order for us to deal with that, we're going to have to split in a horizontal way as well. And so femto moving into, which we've already launched with CISCO for our consumer standpoint, moving into the small cell and then that hierarchical structure and the self-optimized networks that are going to be required to help manage that, to put the services on the right server, if you will, for that customer. So that's one area. And then the innovation that goes with that is, how do you make that seamless? For our CISCO example, the partnering that we did for frictionless activation of those devices, that innovation to continue to drive that, but we're also going to have to make that seamless for our technicians that have to support this network in the future.
Chris, one of the hardest things I think we all do is get companies who have been very successful to transform themselves. Often we use technology for our customers or internal to help do that. How is AT&T reinventing itself in this scenario, and how much does the new markets play in helping the company reinvent itself?
As we look at combining what we're building with our mobile IP network and what we would be able to do with cloud services, and then the points that we have, not only in the U.S., but around the globe for our IP backbone, and leveraging that for the hosting services, etc. So building that capability, exposing that to the enterprise customers, and then leveraging those same capabilities to make it frictionless for the consumer to leverage those same capabilities.
Jerry, Orange, French Telecom, reinventing itself very rapidly. At a period of time in Europe where many people are talking 3G and 4G and LTE, etc., you are investing in service provider Wi-Fi. Why?
Let me, to make a long story short, let me say that what we were able to deliver so far is to propose a network, which means bandwidth, latency, security, reliability. But what we are looking for now, and it's some kind of reinvention of our main DNA assets, is no longer a network, but a smart network. And this is a place where we are looking for partners, and CISCO is probably one of the best we could find, given the wide range of portfolio offers you have. And smart networks mean the capacity to combine the wide range of available solutions for the service of the customer, but as well for the service of our operations to make them more reliable, more cost efficient. So that's what is at stake, and it's clearly consistent with what was explained by Chris. It follows the huge mobile data traffic increase. The revenues are slightly stabilized, decreasing or increasing depending on the geographies, but the traffic is increasing on a twofold basis per year, which means that we have at the same time to reinvent all the means to manage this traffic and at cost efficiency level for the economic purposes of the company like Orange. So Wi-Fi is as a combination of free radio access based on our fixed line is obviously the counterpart of managed radios, 3G or 4G, and what we are looking for is not a standalone deployment of Wi-Fi capacity, but the capacity to synchronize, to manage through a single information system, through a single core network, through a single customer experience, both capacities provided by those two different capacities, Wi-Fi and 3G, 4G networks.
Got it. David, every move Shaw's make, you've had your fingerprints all over for 17 years, both technically and business-wise. You're a company with $5 billion in revenue. You've been able to take on very large players and also, candidly, a number of small challengers. Where do you put really where you're going with wireless in terms of mobility into the challenges and opportunities? And at a time that you have a 4G license, which all is paid for pretty much, you're putting in SD Wi-Fi. So kind of correlate the two, if you will, the bigger picture first, and then bring it into a specific question at hand.
Well, we are a small operator, there's no doubt about it. And going back to some of the earlier questions, in our world we're innovating, we're constantly changing our culture, or we're dying. And it's really at the root of our culture, we constantly introducing new services. And when I started with the cable operation, we were just having cable customers, and what we tried to create was a new experience called broadband internet. And actually that's when the relationship with Cisco really fired up. I had lunch with a Cisco salesman one day, and he said, "I want to be your strategic partner." I had no idea what he meant, but he was buying lunch, so I said yes. So this culture of innovation has been really core to...
I'd like to buy dinner tonight then.
Actually, you bought dinner last night. Louis Philippe was magnificent. At the core of who we are is really being innovative, and we've really added a tremendous amount of value to our satellite and our cable products. We're offering 250 megabits per second to basically all of our home, strategies to go to gig and 3 gig. But how do we take that experience outside the home? That's where we really start to add a new kind of value, and really are seeing internet as existing on a spectrum of mobility. And we feel very comfortable in the wired non-mobile piece right now. We're leading that area. How do we get into the mobile space? And we did a bit of an experiment. Thank you for bringing that up. It cost us about $100 million last year.
I do those experiments periodically.
Yeah.
I know the pressure.
So when we really looked at the numbers of a new entrant, entering as an LTE player, the incumbents had a very strong foothold and a Me Too product. The economics were not there for us. And it didn't really play to our strength either. Our strength is having an incredible amount of bandwidth in 98% of addresses where we're from, Western Canada. And our strength is really in small cell. Our platform starts in small cell, then moves into macro cell. That starts to make sense for us. So that's why we stepped back from the LTE program, the macro LTE program, and rethought really who we were and how we're going to add value for our customers. And the idea of giving free, high-speed internet in all the places that people hang out and use their tablets and cell phones. That was really the core of our strategy, is adding an incredible amount of value to the product we already had and growing into mobility.
Now, one of the things that you'll find out about all three panelists, including Kelly as the fourth, is there's not a hesitancy about being very candid, even if I ask the question with disagreeing, which I expect to do, because back to the learning what is leading edge. David, you all have bet on a primary partner in many of the areas of your investment. Yet, going back 5 years ago, this is something that almost no service provider operation would do. And it isn't because of your size you do that. It's often because of the value a partner brings. Or at least that's what my sales team told me when they bought me lunch. But it does speak to an industry trend that may be different. Because if you truly got revenues growing not at the rate of your expenses going up, and if you want to be profitable, you have to say, what experience do you bring to your customers? How do you monetize and optimize the operations? How do you move in mobility and video and cloud in a way that is distinguishable on that? And how do you launch new services at a faster velocity? Is that too simplistic? And being very candid, what value does CISCO have as your partner or not? And do you think it's applicable to small and large companies?
I think it's applicable to a company of any size. And I'll be honest, my background's in telecom and internet engineering, so for the last 15 years I've been trying to remake our cable company into an internet company, because I believe ultimately there really will only be one network, and that will be the internet. So aligning ourselves with partners that power that transition, taking all of our services into IP, disconnecting them from your cable box and letting them go out into a mobile environment where you want to experience wherever you want to experience your service that you're paying for is really fundamental to who we are. And that's how we're reinventing ourselves in this new way right now.
Gary, from your side, the same question I asked David. A little bit about cloud partner. Do you see that changing in the last 5 years, whether it's with us or our peers? Do you see a dramatic closer relationship or not? And what are you really after in a partnership?
Yes, I think that there is one point you should not underestimate within CISCO is your capacity to provide business cases given the wide range, and this is something which epitomizes very well the wide range of customers you have within CISCO. You can provide very useful information to the marketeers as well within our operators companies on the way we can take advantage of the different functionalities, of the new features you are embedding within the routers, within the core network, within all the devices which are produced by you, CISCO, and delivered and spread around the globe. So that's really, and frankly speaking, a very good free contribution from CISCO to the operator life. And of course, I would like to mention as well the capacity to take into account very proactively the diversity of the situation of the different operators around the globe. We, within France Telecom Orange, within our footprint, we offer a very wide range of different situations given the spectrum diversity, given the different customer usages in EMA countries, Eastern Europe, Western Europe, and you have this capacity to adapt to the different situations. So this is a second good reason for us to work with CISCO as a key partner for this development of what I call the smart networks.
I'll come back later and ask what does each one of the panelists think we need to do better, and I always like to do that a little bit later in the conversation. Chris, I'm going to ask you one that you know is coming, then I'm going to ask you a little bit more your crystal ball and see where we go in the future. So let me ask you the first question. AT&T have not traditionally really partnered more than with the product area with companies, and yet I've watched what you all have done with Apple, I've watched what you did with CISCO with telepresence. You've had responsibility for not just the development, but the business strategy behind this. Is that changing dramatically, and if so, why? And be pretty candid, what do you like about CISCO? And teach us also what's the one thing you want to see us do better?
there are two ways to look at that, John. One is the go-to-market. What do we white label and sell directly to the customer? And the partnering that we've done with Cisco in the telepresence space falls into that category. The other area is that base layer 1 through 4 that we're providing, and we need to be able to scale and optimize. There, we've divided the network into multiple domains and picked 2 or 3 partners in each one of those domains. And Cisco is in some of those domains and not in others that you would like to be in. So the challenge in that second more is, how do you work well on the interoperability across vendor partners, across that industry, so that we can optimize that ecosystem collectively. And those partners that will play well with others, if you will, in terms of that interoperability and how you do that integration and how you may open up portions of your network so that we can have performance management, trouble management across those broad areas is a key piece of that. And then delivering all that with quality.
So I'm going to ask you, taking out your crystal ball. Often when you talk about new areas, i.e., if you will, cloud, intelligent cloud, IP delivered cloud, small cell, SP Wi-Fi, it takes a long time before they take off. And yet, it feels to me like we're at an inflection point. Fast forward just 2 years. I realize strategic thinking is always 3, 5, or beyond. But fast forward 2 years from now, where would those technologies, in your opinion, be on a global basis, and then maybe back to North America, where you can start with North American global basis? All of us have to understand the disclaimer that goes here is this is all of our best estimates on what could happen. And if you knew this answer cold, you'd probably be making more money in a different occupation. But your best cut on what it looks like 2 years out.
I think we will be effective in the cloud implementation in terms of opening up the network, creating those APIs, making them discoverable for our enterprise clients as well as the developer community, so that they can leverage the capabilities of the network at the higher layers. And then the migration of products and services onto the cloud services. And I think the challenge for a company like Cisco is to do that with their elements themselves. How do you work with us to move some of that infrastructure that you optimize and sell to us in open computing environments as well? And how does that become an integration point?
Kelly, the tough question, when we begin to talk about going after this market different than most of our peers, which is how do we focus on revenue generation for you all, new profit opportunities, and that's 1, 2 before we even start to talk about technology. It's something that's challenging to teach your sales force. It's also challenging to get your engineering team to think that way. How do you talk about an elevator approach to mobility? And I apologize, Kelly has no idea what I'm asking ahead of time, as do any of the other speakers on the topics I'm talking on. But Kelly, how do you say how this architecture plays together on mobility? What are the elements you think we've got our act together on? And what are the other frontiers we have to move faster on?
Sure.
Oh, you might have to write this down.
Take good notes.
Maybe we can record it. No.
So there's 2 things.
Now here's the Cisco pen. He writes well. It's very good for orders, things of that type.
So there's 2 things, John, which is one, in mobility, so far we've been kind of fixated on mobility being associated with a radio type or a device. But right now we're entering an era, which is really an era where the radio type no longer defines the network architecture. And this is an era where you need to have heterogeneous network access. It could be Wi-Fi, unlicensed small cells, or large cells, licensed cells, femtos or macro cellular networks, 3G, 4G, etc. And really combine that with, Terry, to your point, an intelligent core network, a smart network, and then leverage that to be able to create services, but also to be able to optimize the performance and the experience that the end user gets. So if I was to look at these 3 areas, John, the way I think about it is our vision in mobility is really about helping our service providers, our service provider customers, all different types, to be able to address the business challenges of network reach, as well as network intelligence, and really to improve the service creation velocity. And that's the areas that we focus on in terms of helping you with all the areas that we talk about. And the announcements today are really related to those areas as well.
David, you talk about Canada, and to me often what occurs in Scandinavia, what occurs in candidly Australia, And Canada often is leading edge in the service provider industry because you've got a pretty well-off group of citizens who have high expectations, a large geography to deliver on, and an extremely competitive environment. Key trends that you see, how fast will this occur, and maybe lessons learned if you had to do some of the things in the areas we're just talking about differently, what would you do?
Well, first, John, I thought I told you David was my bar name. Normally I go by Dennis, but
Oh shit!
I don't even know what your question was anymore.
I don't normally make mistakes in my team. They said it once, I did it earlier. Dennis, I apologize. I'm deeply embarrassed. And you can call me anything you want now. And I deserve it. Sorry.
So maybe you could just...
Whenever you make a mistake, you try to just kind of quickly move on to the next topic, attract the attention over somewhere else. Dennis.
What would we do differently? Is that the...
Well, no, I want to start with Canada. Canada often uses new technologies so far ahead of their counterparts, much like Scandinavia does in Australia. If I watch those three geographic regions, it's almost always leading edge new ideas there. You're going very aggressively with both wireless, you're going very aggressively with where you're headed, perhaps in terms of the video. Key takeaways that would be a benefit for the audience here in terms of that area. And then secondly, what would you do differently? Either would you go faster or slower versus where you're currently at?
It's a difficult question to answer. I'm not sure what those three geographies really would have in common, but we find ourselves with probably the most competitive environment that we see when we look across cable operators in North America. We have a very aggressive telephone company in our backyard, which I used to work for, so I know a little bit how they think, and they're taking this very personally, and we are putting together a strategy that not only meets what they're trying to do with the customer experience, but exceeds it, leapfrogs it. When we look at our cable plan, it's a 5 gigabit per second network, and the way we're using it today is not really optimized in the way it could be. So we're sitting on a multi-billion-dollar asset. And if you think of it in terms of cars, we're in first gear. We were at a 250 megabit per second service now. We're going to roll that into progressively faster and faster services until that whole 5 gig becomes a data pipe. And playing that model forward, we really need strategic partners to help us there. And ecosystems and partners are core of what we're going to do. If we were going to do something a little differently, perhaps than we did, I think we would have thought about our entry into the wireless space perhaps a little more cautiously and approached it more from our strength, which is really small cells. Built a small cell network that would support 95% of our traffic, and then put a thin layer of LTE over that for the mobility, and approach that end of the mobile spectrum from that perspective. Instead, we replicated what worked for others, which clearly in the end wasn't the model that was going to work for us. So if there's one thing that we would have done differently, perhaps we would have rethought how we entered into the mobile space.
Terry, your operations has often been leading in France with Minitel over the years and many new concepts. Is it more difficult in a country that is used to almost leading in these areas to really take to the next level of innovation? Or is it something that is something that your company's been able to master pretty well, and you found that many of your citizens in the countries you cover adjust quickly?
I should not say that it's difficult. It's an opportunity, I think, for a company like Orange, which has within its DNA innovation very well embedded. We consider that it's an opportunity to provide, to manage the complexity of all those different elements. Clearly, the customers, it be Wi-Fi, 3G, 4G, LTE, they don't care. What they want, it's a good customer experience, simple, secure connectivity to the network, premium services available at a good price, of course, but premium services available and provided on a reliable way. So for us, I think that all this complexity management is a very good opportunity for the deployment of our expertise, skills, and so on. But there is something which is paradoxical, which is that at the same time, for operation, for cost savings or for cost efficiency, we need to automatize, to have very automatic, remotely managed elements within the network. That's the elements which will be provided by CISCO, by all the vendors. But you should help us keeping under control this automatic new network we will manage, which is a combination of IT and telco infrastructure. And this is, I think, a very, very big challenge.
So the question I'd like to ask now, and then I'll open it up to the audience for some questions and we'll mix it back and forth, is the one thing that you want to see CISCO do better. This is normally the last thing a CEO would ask of a panel, but my view is the only way that you lead this industry is to constantly listen. And to listen both what you're doing right, which you all have been very kind to us in your comments, but also one thing we need to do different. You can either look at it from an engineering point of view or from a company point of view. Chris, I'm going to ask you to start, if you don't mind.
Okay. I think that the challenge is staying ahead of the quality and the scalability. We are going through a significant transition in terms of the mix of signaling to bearer traffic to serviceless traffic, and having platforms that scale through that easily and effectively, and anticipating the fact that that mix is in a substantial shift in the wireless network, and that's going to have impacts on our layer 2, layer 3, and the wireline network as well. So managing the way through that shift in the scalability.
Aaron?
Two things. I want to say that I fully agree with what you said about interoperability. That's still a key challenge for us operators. We would like to have best of breed elements and be able to adjust or adapt all those elements for the benefit of our end customers. So that's my first point. And the second point is speed up the convergence between fixed and mobile. We have a wide range of challenges ahead of us, and we need to speed up. That probably was one of our drawbacks in those past few years. We considered over the top as the model to be followed. We discovered that infrastructure network is a key asset, and we need to speed up a little bit the convergence of all the elements within the core, within the access related to fixed and mobile at the same time.
So Dennis, other than making mistakes on somebody's names, who's a very good customer and partner, so please forgive me for that. So other than that being the first thing I need to do better, feedback in your usual canvas style. What do you think we need to do better when you look at the transitions we're trying to make?
Well, John, it's 2 words: lower prices. I think one of the things that we're recognizing now, especially in our industry, which is cable and satellite, is that convergence is moving quicker than we expected. And in this state of convergence, we have the mobile world hanging out over here, the wired world here, and the Wi-Fi is trying to come up the middle. And we recognize that we can't do this all on our own. And we need to bring into this relationship, the Shaw and CISCO relationship, more elements of an ecosystem that puts together holistic solutions that evolve from one type of medium to another. Rather than us, maybe it's because we're a small player, for us to try to put 20 or 30 different technologies together to create a product, we need to have a partnership with CISCO that I think brings more of an ecosystem to that, brings us more holistic view of solutions, and just keep buying lunch.
We like that. Also important, I think, for all the audience to understand, we firmly believe and understand we've got to do things on a scale and lowering the cost, regardless if you consider average revenue per user, and allow you to achieve the profitability that the way the industry's currently going is going to be almost impossible to do. So it's not only about new services, it's how do we allow the scalability and the flexibility on it. And Kelly, you know what we're doing on areas like R5000, not thinking of a 1 to 200% increase, but more in the 5 to 10-fold. It gives you flexibility. Let me open it up for questions in the room, and I always worry about a question coming from the back row. So I'm going to walk all the way back